and welcome to a brand new video. Today we have a new mysterious, horrific and disturbing real-life case. This is one of the videos that I have investigated more during my history in YouTube, literally. But very well, before we start, follow me in all my social media because I do Facebook and Instagram lives 2 or 3 times per week, and I also upload exclusive videos on those social media, like part 2 for mysterious countdowns, tutorials and vlogs, among other things. Well, without anything else to say, let's dive deep into this disturbing story. The mysterious case of JONBENÉT Ramsey. Well, as always, let's start talking about the person who was the victim in this case. JONBENÉT was a girl that was born on August 6th of 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. When she was only 1 year old, she and her family moved to the Colorado state on USA. Her name is a combination of her father's name, which is JONBENÉT. Her mother was Patricia, also known as Patsy Ramsey, and her brother was called Burke, who by that time was 3 years older than his sister. JONBENÉT was a beauty pageant girl who was really renowned because of that. In the US, the beauty pageant tradition among girls is quite widespread, and she was one of the most famous in that time. She won hundreds of contests. Her mother was also very known in the pageant world, for in 1977 she won the Miss West Virginia beauty pageant. She loved everything about the pageants since she was very young, and that's why when her daughter was born, she started introducing her into that world. Her father John, by that time, was a businessman and owner of a very renowned IT company called Access Graphics. Well, now that I've told you a little bit about this girl, let's start with the sad part of this story. It was the morning of December 26th in 1996, namely the morning after Christmas. The 911 line from the US received a worrying call from a mother who said her daughter had been stolen, that she had been kidnapped, and that there was a ransom note for her return. I'm going to quickly play the fragment from the call so you can listen, and then we talk about the call, the note, and everything.
911 emergency.
We need him. Police.
What's going on?
5515th Street.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Oh my God. Please.
Take a deep breath.
Please,
Okay.
hurry.
Patsy?
The call was made by JONBENÉT's mother. She had woken up around 5 in the morning to go down to the kitchen for some water. When she descended the stairs, she found a note in that same stairs where it said that her daughter had been kidnapped. She quickly ran to the girl's room and didn't find her, and that's when, supposedly, she became desperate and called the police. The note said they needed a total of $180,000 to pay for the girl's ransom. It also said to not call the police or the girl would die. Sometime later, the police arrived at the house. They tried to de-escalate the situation, and long time passed while the police went back and forth. During that time, the parents called some of their friends to get support during that difficult time. In one moment, the police asked John specifically to check the house again, from top to bottom, in case the girl was somewhere. He said he had checked it 1,000 times, but still he decided to take his friend to search with him. In that moment, he quickly and in a very strange way went to the basement where he found JONBENÉT's lifeless body, with a white sheet on top. In that moment, he realized that the girl had a rope tied to the neck, some tape on the mouth, and a skull fracture. What he did was take the girl, lift her up, take her to the living room, and put her on the floor again. And here's when the investigation about this case begins. It's one of the strangest, and I'm going to give you many details I saw on a fabulous documentary, which recalls the investigation that has been done in this case. After performing the autopsy to the girl, the causes of death were revealed. With all that, they realized that the rope or the hangman's knot, and that she had around her neck when her father found her, was the first cause of death, strangulation. Later, they realized that her skull had a fissure in the upper part, measuring at least 8 centimeters long. It was like a rectangle that was here in her skull. So the primary causes of death here were death by suffocation due to strangulation and cranioencephalic trauma. The real question here was who the culprit was. Hundreds of theories were evaluated. They interviewed hundreds of persons that could be suspects. However, the primary suspicions fell precisely within the girl's family, namely her mother, her father, and her brother. But let's start talking about the first theory about her death. Basically, when the police began to investigate, they realized that there was an open window on the basement, those that normally exist within the basement of the houses in the US. That if you open that little window, you can see the outside. Supposedly, that window was half open, there was a broken glass and a suitcase just below the window. So the first hypothesis was made, saying that someone probably had entered the house in the night, had taken the girl without anyone noticing, had taped her mouth shut, and had taken her to the basement. This story, or this version of the events, was completely debunked because in the window through which the man supposedly entered, the kidnapper, was a spider web in a corner, which even went down to the lower part of the window, and it was completely intact. You could tell it had been there for a long time. So it was impossible that someone had entered through that window without damaging or breaking that spider web. After, regarding the broken glass, the father said that he had broken it many months ago and that he never repaired it. Regarding the suitcase, there wasn't an explanation. The parents say that there is where the kidnapper was going to put her to take her away, but he didn't make it, but then they realized it wasn't like that. Besides, it was impossible for the kidnapper's letter to have been written in such a short period of time due to the length. And also because of the materials, I mean the sheets and the pen were property of, or they were inside the house. After debunking the window theory, they say that probably someone had entered the house. However, they never found that the doors were forced, manipulated, and they also didn't find any fingerprints on the doors. But the parents say that they had given the keys to many people in their lives, people who had worked there like laborers, maids, cleaning ladies. However, all those people were interviewed and they obviously say they were innocent, that they weren't involved, and that was impossible. Now let's talk about the primary suspects, her father, her mother, and her brother. Let's begin with the father. The first theory is that her father had been guilty. It is said that the girl was also found with signs of sexual abuse and that they found DNA in her panties, her underwear, that didn't correspond with the family inside. Firstly, it was said that the same kidnapper had also sexually abused her, but since we debunked that option, the next suspect was her father. It is said that apparently her father had abused her for many years, for they found certain irregularities inside the girl's sexual organs, like she had been sexually abused before. So people began accusing the father of doing it. It was said that he was abusing the girl when he accidentally hit her against something, causing the skull fracture and making her die instantly. Later, her wife found out and tried to help him cover the act, suffocating the girl so it seemed she was murdered, creating a totally strange scene surrounded her dead and well, all of that. Even the Vanity Fair magazine published an article some months later saying that the parents were probably involved in some kind of sex game with the girl, which ended really bad. It was said that probably he was the guilty one, for just when her daughter died and after the police arrived and they had found the body, he disappeared during an hour from the crime scene. Nothing was known of him during that time, and then he came back in a really strange state, like in frenzy, like he was nervous all the time, and it was quite odd. Besides, he hired 2 criminal lawyers, a PR person, and several other members of the law to help them with this case. This move was very strange for them, for if they weren't guilty, they would have waited a while before hiring people to help them with this case. He was also presumed guilty because the amount of ransom money from the letter was an amount that he had received the day before in compensation for a job. Which was really odd because they had a lot money. And if a kidnapper had wanted, he could have asked for way more money. But he precisely asked for that amount. Besides, as I've told you, when he found the girl, it was really odd for when his friend arrived and he told him like, well, let's search the house again. He went directly to the basement, when supposedly he had gone there several times before. He realized the girl is there, lying on the floor. But it's really odd because one would look at the floor at something white and say, well, dirty clothes, but he knew it was the girl. Besides, he completely altered the investigation and the crime scene by taking the girl upstairs and then downstairs again. It was a complete tampering of the scene, and that's why it is said that he could be guilty. Now let's talk about the mother, who has the most proof against her for possibly being the perpetrator of the crime. The mother was the one who called 911. As we heard, it's a very frenetic and restless call, but towards the end, her tones start to fade a little. Like she's calmer, like, oh, I called the police, now what we do. There's something that you probably didn't notice, and it is that at the end of the call, when they hang up, or so it seems, and the agent of the call is like, Patsy, Patsy, and nobody answers, you can hear at the end in 3 different moments something very strange. A vibration like bzzz.
Patsy? Patsy?
This vibration was analyzed by some very thorough FBI investigators. It was processed through an audio software that helps to reduce the noise and makes miracles, so to speak, and be able to hear what was in those moments in which the call wasn't hung. What they discovered was really shocking. The woman, when making the call, wasn't alone as she said. She said she was alone or just with her husband, but she said his son had slept all night and they hadn't told him anything. Some other voices were heard in the recording. It seems that she, after ending the call, what she did was, in that time, she called from a phone that wasn't wireless and had to be hung up. It seems that what she did was hung up the phone, but she hung it wrongly and the phone fell. There were 3 important moments. In the first one, after she hangs up, what it's heard is the voice of a man in the beginning. This man says, "We're not going to speak to you," or "We're not speaking to you." It is said that this is the girl's father's voice, John. In the second moment, it is unknown if the voice says, "Help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus," or "What did you do? Help me, Jesus." The last voice that is heard, it doesn't seem to be a woman or a man, it seems to be the voice of a little kid. It seems to say, "What did you find?" They had said that Burke hadn't woke up in all night, that they hadn't told anything to anyone, and she had said that when she made the call, she was completely alone. This seemed to me like a very curious and interesting fact, and it is one of the things that incriminate the family regarding the event, or you can tell they're talking that they're desperate about something that just happened. Accordingly to this call, the culprit was probably the boy, who we're going to talk about later. The second piece of evidence that incriminates the mother is the note. The note was written with a pen and a piece of paper from the notebook she had in her office. Her office was also in her house, to be clear. Besides, when the graphological test was done, namely the calligraphy test, it was found that the style was very similar to Patsy's. It is said that maybe she was guilty because, as you know, she was a beauty queen when she was young and she wanted JONBENÉT to be just like her. All the money she earned mainly came from her daughter and the contest she won. It is said that they were probably rehearsing that night. She was being very harsh, and it came a time when she got tired of demanding the best of her that she accidentally hit her with something, and that's when she fractured her skull and killed her without realizing she had done it, and that's when the whole story began. The FBI brought some people that were investigators and body language and expression specialists, something very similar to the show that is called Lie to Me. I don't know if you have watched that series, but it's very recommended. Basically, they started reading the expressions and what the parents did during the interviews. On one of these interviews, the host asked the mother if she is sure that her daughter was taken by a kidnapper, raped, and murdered by him. Before she answers, she starts shaking her head, no. And then her husband intervenes and says, yes, we're sure, and she nods. According to them who read those gestures, they say that she obviously knows that it's not true that someone kidnapped her daughter.
Are you fully convinced that your daughter was kidnapped by some outsiders outside your family or circle of friends?
Yes.
Shaking her head no.
It's just so hard to know.
Shaking her head no, and then when John says yes, she changes her head to a nod up and down.
However, the mother could never be processed, and in the end, nothing was discovered because she died of ovarian cancer in 2006. The next one, and for me, is the one who probably did it, and I'm pretty sure he did it, is her brother Burke. In that moment, JONBENÉT was 6 years old and her brother Burke was 9 years old. It is said that Burke was a very shy person, that in that time he didn't speak to many people, didn't like socializing, and probably was very jealous of her sister for she got all the attention, both from her parents and the public in general. Even a friend of the family who was interviewed told that one time when she was with JONBENÉT and with Burke, she tried to approach Burke to talk to him and the kid said, "Don't come any closer, I don't want you to talk to me, get away from me and don't bother me," which is a very strange attitude for a kid his age. According to the FBI's explanation, which was in charge of this thorough investigation, it is said that what could have happened was the following. In the autopsy, they found pineapple inside JONBENÉT's stomach. Namely, hours before she was murdered, she ate pineapple. And what does this have to do with her brother? Well, his favorite food, and also JONBENÉT's, was pineapple with milk, a kind of cereal or something like that, which is very common in the US. It is said that that night JONBENÉT went to sleep like she always did to her bed, and apparently her brother got hungry. He went down to the kitchen and found her mom cooking some things, for she was also hungry. The mother said like, well, if you want, you can have some tea with your usual bowl of pineapple and milk. The boy started eating. He was sitting at the table when apparently JONBENÉT woke up. She decided to go down and found her brother eating. So it seems like John took some pineapple directly from the bowl and ate some pieces. According to this, her brother was tired of the permissiveness and the shows from her sister the princess and took a flashlight that was on top of the table where he was eating and hit her. This fractured the girl's skull and she died instantly. This flashlight plays a very important role, for in the crime scene they didn't pay much attention to that detail. However, after the crime scene videos began to be watched, because normally a video is filmed to account for how things were located, and they found the flashlight. People say that it was impossible for a boy of that age to be able to hit a girl with the amount of strength to fracture her skull. However, the police checked that and said that it was completely possible. How did they do it? Well, they took a kid and made him recreate the scene, hitting a mannequin with real skull, real skin, real hair, and they realized that the blow the boy gave the mannequin was exactly the same blow that JONBENÉT had received on her head. This was something that amazed the investigators, and they said like, it's likely he obviously accidentally hit her. His parents did everything they could to cover up these events. It was said that they did that so the boy wasn't judicialized. One can say that is a very young age. However, during those times, children could be prosecuted. Later, during that time, the boy underwent many interviews, several months, several years later, to talk about what happened. In the first one, that was made only a few days after the death of his sister, they started asking him about what happened, but all the time he was messing around, like trying to play, not paying much attention to what happened. It was really odd for the investigators because for someone who just lost her sister in such a tragic event, it was impossible for him to feel such at ease, so calm about what had occurred. He is asked about if at some point he woke up during the night, if he knew something, and he said he had never woken up, that he actually had a very heavy sleep and nothing could wake him up. that the only thing that had woke him up was probably his mother screaming and calling the police, and he said, oh, maybe something happened to JONBENÉT, but I did not pay attention, which is very, very strange. He's asked if he feels safe in that house, and he says yes, of course, there's no problem, which the investigators also find very strange, for they say that if someone had really kidnapped her, murdered her, or raped her, the boy would be concerned about his safety and wouldn't be so calm, saying that he's not really worried about his safety. They ask him if he has any secrets, and he says no, that he doesn't remember one in particular, but still, if he had one, he wouldn't reveal it to them. The investigation goes on, and there's another suspicion. JONBENÉT had 2 marks on her body, on the ribs region, towards the back. People say that she probably had been controlled with an electric gun, like the ones the police uses to control people. It was said that probably the kidnapper had come to her bed, had given her an electric shock, and that's when he knocked her out. However, some tests were made later, and that really didn't happen. The person who receives an electric shock of that magnitude doesn't pass out, not at all, but on the contrary, gets an adrenaline rush that make him scream and want to get out of that situation. More so, the marks didn't match the pattern from one of those machines. And when a person receives an electric shock, they end up with lines, not dots. This raised some suspicions, and they say, then what are those marks? As it happens in the crime scene, they found some train tracks who were Burke's. The train was one of his favorites. He even had his own train room in which he played. And when they compared the distance between those train tracks with the distance between the marks on her ribs, they realized it was the same. It was like someone had used them to move the girl so they could avoid touching her, like trying to see if she was alive, something that still is difficult to understand. Also later, when he was already 11 years old, a new interview was made in which they asked him various things. One of the questions, do you sometimes get up at night to eat something? And he said yes, that some nights he got up and eat something. More so, they asked him why he had eaten that night, and he said like pudding, yogurt, blah blah. And the interview leads him to other questions and tell him like, sometimes parents like that their kids eat fruits. He said yes, I like pineapple. The man said, well, pineapple is your favorite fruit. And he said, yes, it's my favorite fruit. And then, do you know which was JONBENÉT's favorite fruit? And he said, probably pineapple. A few years ago, he was interviewed for the Dr. Phil TV show, a man who tries to solve cases, but really serious ones. He made an interview to a grown-up Burke, but his reaction was very suspicious. You could see him smiling all the time, like uncomfortable, like he didn't know what to say. It was very suspicious.
I know that we are suspects.
Did you murder your sister, JONBENÉT?
No.
There's an event that happened in the year of 1994, which a friend of the mother narrated, and is that in one time she saw JONBENÉT arrive at home with sort of a strange wound. She asked her what happened, and she told her that accidentally Burke hit her very hard with a golf club, fracturing her cheek. They had to reconstruct that with plastic surgery. He is the next suspect, and for me, the theory really makes sense, and the parents probably want to cover up what he had done. In the call that was made to 911, it seemed like the mom says like, what did you do? To the kid like, what have you done? And the father says, we're not going to talk to you. Besides, he also says, what did you find? Like he was the one responsible for leaving her in the basement and all. Lastly, another suspect appeared in 2006. John Mark Carr was a man who was traveling to Thailand and was apprehended by the police. He said he was the culprit of JONBENÉT's death and that he had murdered her, he had raped her because he was obsessed with her back then. And he finally succeeded. However, later it was proved that the DNA that had been found on the girl's underwear didn't belong to him and that he didn't have anything to do with the case. Later, he wasn't prosecuted for this case, but he was arrested for having child pornography. And now, talking about the underwear they find with a strange DNA, and about the fact that the owner of the DNA was never found. It is said that the DNA was from the kidnapper that raped her, but in the end the investigators did many tests. They bought new underwear, didn't touch it at all, and took it into a DNA specialized laboratory. One of the best in the world performed a test and they realized that underwear always has DNA from strange people. Why? Because when they manufacture, packed, and box, people come in contact with them. The manufacturers come in contact with them, and this DNA probably belonged to the person who had packed the underwear or the one who had sold them or transported them. So there's the answer to why there was a strange DNA in that girl's underwear. Well, for you, I don't know who's guilty, but for me it's the brother. But anyways, this case remains unsolved and will probably remain that way for many years. The Ramsey family had a lot of money, a lot of power. There were many FBI agents who obviously knew who the culprit was, and they obviously pushed a lot for the case to be solved. But even within the FBI itself, they told them it wasn't going to be solved, that they didn't want any political problems. It is like if they had bought those people so they couldn't say actually anything. Very well, I'm going to leave you the complete documentary in which you can find all this with all its details. It's incredibly good. Okay, this is it for the video. If you like it a lot, as always, don't forget to leave thumbs up. Don't forget to comment and leave the ideas you want me to film. And if you want me to talk about Paulettee, which you requested a lot. Remember to follow me in all my social media. You know I have like 1 billion social media accounts. Subscribe to this wonderful channel. That helps me a lot to do more videos. Activate the notification bell so it lets you know when I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to follow your dreams and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!